everyone, and welcome to our exclusive interview with Scuderia Cameron Glickenhaus driver Jeff Westphal. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. You must be pretty tired, but how are you bearing up recently?
Thank you guys. No, I just had a good night's sleep. Finally beating the jet lag. So lately it's been good the last 24 hours.
I was going to say, we say tired because you've been really busy as of late and have spent a lot of time at the Nurburgring as a driver and the impressive Glickenhaus project. Now, it's a pretty impressive name alone, Glickenhaus, but for those who may not be quite aware, just give us some insight as to what the project involves.
Yeah, the project is a continuation of the previous car that Jim Glickenhaus built, the P45, which was a car that used a lot of Ferrari componentry. The difference with this project that he's undertook is that the car shares nothing with Ferrari parts at all. Everything's built in-house by them, by their small firm. A lot of the engineers come from Pininfarina, the famous consulting brand that Ferrari's used, and their plan was to build a GT race car that read through the rule book and took advantage of every little aspect that they could. And so the car that you see as of now, which is called SCG-003, that is the brainchild of what the GT regs from the FIA will allow you to do at the moment.
So a really, really unique take on how to get yourself started in motorsport in terms of bringing a car and not just being a customer to a company. Last weekend you headed out to the Nurburgring for the ADAC 6-hour qualifying race. Now this is a new event which has basically been introduced to design to help teams prepare for the big 24 hours of the Green Hell. Do you think the weekend was beneficial for you and the team?
Absolutely. With our yellow car, 002, that I'm piloting, it was less than ideal. We had a situation where we qualified quite well. The car was fourth out of 80 cars on the grid, which is quite promising for how new the car is and how much development we still need to do. But with that said, the morning of the race, we had an electrical issue that ended up turning our dashboards into coasters for a nice beverage. And we kept swapping through dashboards. We actually had the factory Audi guys from Phoenix help us and bring us a new one, which was our fourth attempt at it. And we basically couldn't remedy it. So the yellow car was rendered to the garage before the start of the race from the grid. I shuttled it back in, which was a big bummer for the 002 car and the drivers, but the 001 was still able to make the race. It finished. It did quite well. The pace was good all throughout the race, even at the end of the stint. And then, they had also rented a Porsche 997 Cup car for some of the drivers to get qualified, because the Germans are pretty strict about the rules regarding this 24-hour race and what specific races at Nurburgring have to be done prior to being allowed to drive at the 24. So the Porsche was our insurance policy, and that part worked out fantastic. We all got qualified, and we were ready to go.
So just how important is an event like the 6-hour when you're preparing for arguably the most grueling race in motorsport?
I think it's probably the most important thing you can do prior to showing up on time for the 24 hours, to be honest. The race itself is, let me start here. Nürburgring is probably the most difficult track on a racing machine just because of the sheer length of the lap and the bumps. I mean, it'll literally rattle a car apart. And so for something to be reliable for 24 hours, a 6-hour jaunt prior to that is a good start to see what's getting loose or what's starting to fatigue, or if nothing at all, but it gives you a good way to shake it down. On the driver's side, it's also probably the most challenging track for a driver because you have so many corners and the road is so narrow, and the surface is used quite frequently. So in the wet, it's tremendously slippery. So as far as drivers are concerned, as many laps as you can to go around the circuit and get prepared is ideal. And a 6-hour race pretty much is as good as it's going to get prior to running another 24 ahead of the main one.
So what major bullet points did you take away from that weekend that you can perhaps use in the big 24-hour race?
For me personally, I made some bullet points regarding a couple of corners, a handful of them, 3 or 4 that I can kind of perfect the rolling speed. A lot of the lap time from Nürburgring comes from just carrying momentum. The corners are quite fast. I think the slowest one is second gear, but most of them are fourth, fifth, and sixth, where you're entering the corner and exiting the corner. In a racing gearbox in that gear, you're moving the car quite well. So I had a couple that I learned. Most of the bullet points that are going to be beneficial came from the car. Ways to improve the chassis, make it work better around the track, make it be nicer to the tire over an hour stint. Just things to prepare ourselves for the 24 and have the best opportunity that we can against already developed GT3 cars like the Mercedes SLS, and actually the new GT3 car may make an appearance. The new Audi R8, the BMW Z4, which is a fantastically well developed GT3 car, was actually developed at that track, so it's quite strong there. So it'll be, I think it'll be a good week for us. We need to keep our head down and keep working.
And you've mentioned some big names there as well, like the Z4 and the Audi R8. What advantages, though, does this Glickenhaus car have over, let's say the big manufacturers?
Well, I think the biggest advantage that we have is that we weren't forced to stick to the shape of or design of a car that mimics a road car, right? The whole Glickenhaus project started race car first, road car second, which is the opposite for a big manufacturer. So from the onset of drawing the car on a piece of paper, we were able to shape the body and do certain things that we knew would be best for the race car, for drag, for downforce. So I think once we develop everything fully and get the car working the way that all of us are happy with, the car is going to make great amount of downforce and it's going to have a low amount of drag. So on paper, at least, it should be fantastic around that track relative to the competitors.
So what is the end goal of the project then? Is it to be one of the big dominant powerhouses in various endurance championships? Is it to race at a certain event?
That's a good question. Nurburgring holds a pretty, I would say, a high priority for the team and the project. Beyond that, I've heard whispers of things, but nothing has been confirmed. Ultimately, to make a successful race car, something like the Ford GT40 was back in the 60s when it debuted at Le Mans. It's a similar idea. Let's build the best thing we can and show up and see how we do. And hopefully history is made. Hopefully you have a car that's either so quick that it wins a lot, or it's quick enough that they ban it. Or, in my opinion, I think actually this car being eventually banned would be the best thing you could for the brand and for the concept.
Awesome. So an interesting topic, I think, which is slightly different from the Glickenhaus, would be the Tudor United Sports Car Championship merger, which took place about a year ago. Now, you've raced in the championship this year, you've taken wins in it the year before, and of course also had great success in the Grand American Rolex Series in 2013, where you took 4 podiums in 6 races. So a year on, the merger's been complete. What do you think of the merger now, like the debut season's been completed? Is it a good thing for American sports car racing?
I think ultimately it's going to be a good thing for American sports car racing. I think that what was missed on the initial merger was, not allowing a worldwide spec of GT3 car, which everyone else uses in the first year. Now, I've uncovered reasons for why that didn't happen. The most common answer I hear is that Porsche's GT3R wasn't ready yet, and so they made a deal with Grand Am and the France family and everyone saying that, hey, you know what? We can't build a GT3 car, and a lot of our cars make up the field, so how about you allow us to build the GT America and run it for at least 2 years, and we'll sponsor the series. And that business deal basically, in my opinion, stifled the development of IMSA to a greater level. I think that it's going to be a good thing once that happens next year and everything, the dust kind of settles. But the first year was pretty tumultuous, both with regulations and personnel, and just, a not clear message of what was going to happen in the next 18 months.
So we've spoken to Matt Bell recently, who's another one of our PDC instructors, and you both raced at the Daytona 24 Hours, and you actually finished 18th overall. So just give us a brief synopsis of that weekend and how it went for you.
Yeah, the race itself, we were up against it a little bit. The BOP, the balance of performance, and the way that they equalize the cars, unfortunately, isn't always fair for everybody, and it kind of comes and goes. And that's something that in motorsports, in sports car racing, when you have multiple manufacturers, it's going to happen. And unfortunately, with my team personally and us winning the Grand Am championship in 13, and then in 14, the Ferrari winning Daytona, and us having 2 wins during the season after that, the BOP was not moving in our favor. And so Daytona itself, we had a pretty competitive car, and we had a strategy that it was going to keep us clear of a lot of the mess, which is usually what keeps you successful there. But we didn't have the fastest car outright just on a lap, so we needed to be smart. The whole race, the mentality was just stay out of trouble, do your laps. If someone comes by that's able to do half a second a lap better because their car is just a tiny bit quicker, let them do it. Don't fight them too hard. And ultimately, you need to show up in the last 2 hours with a good machine ready to fight at that point.
So at Daytona, you took control of the number 63 Ferrari 458, which you've grown very accustomed with over recent years. And at the Nurburgring, you're going to be driving a very different beast indeed in terms of the SCG 003. What are the differences between the two cars?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, notably, like you said, the SCG is carbon fiber tub. The Ferrari's an aluminum tub that comes off the assembly line like the road car. They both are mid-engine, but where the weight is predominantly sat in the chassis is quite different. You know, the SCG to me feels more like halfway between a GT car and halfway between a prototype, and the Ferrari feels like all GT car. Not that any one's better than the other. It's just it's a lot like Latin. You know, it's a good base. The car is still a car. It still has four tires underneath it, but the language above that is a slight different interpretation of it. The SCG car is a lot more comfortable in faster corners, and I think the Ferrari, with its development over years, is actually easier to drive in the slower corners. Yet, I think once we continue with the SCG, we'll be able to offset that imbalance and slide it more towards the SCG's way as well.
So the SCG 003 just looks and sounds phenomenal. How does it drive, though, in comparison to the Ferrari 458?
The SCG has a twin turbo V6, which is a lot different from a naturally aspirated V8 that's in the Ferrari. From the driver's seat, obviously the noise of the Ferrari is fantastic, but the torque coming from the twin turbo motor on the SCG is phenomenal, and it allows us to, choose if you're between gears, for example, you can be in third or fourth. Doesn't really matter which one you want. The motor will pull quite hard from a very wide range of RPM. So from that side of it, it drives quite well. It puts power down pretty well. In high-speed corners, it gives you a confidence to roll a bunch of speed. We're dealing a little bit with the pitch sensitivity at the moment, which is pretty common on a new car. Pitch sensitivity meaning that as you approach a corner, if you're not, if you're slightly nose down or level, the front end's grip changes dramatically. So we're trying to make that more of a linear feeling or linear grip use from the front tire. That way it's just an easier, more comfortable car to drive, which is ultimately what you want for a 24-hour race.
So talking of the 24-hour race, and if you can get all of those goals achieved before the start, how confident are you going to be of a good result?
Well, I think cautiously optimistic. I think we have a good machine for the race, but I've had 24 hours and long races where we have a great car and it should be phenomenal, and we run into bad luck. And I think that, not necessarily that your entire future is based on luck, but there's so much that can happen in 23 hours before the finish, especially at a track like that. I think we'll show up to be prepared properly and have a good opportunity to go for a great result, but we need to be smart about it as well. We need to stay out of the mess. I've never seen a 24-hour race at Nurburgring that doesn't rain, so we need to make sure that the car's good in the rain as well, because we have to expect that it's going to happen, and just be smart at night and not take extraordinary risks. Keep that for the last hour or two.
So we've spoken about the difference already between the two cars, but let's just touch on the main differences between the two races. The Nurburgring and Daytona circuits are two vastly different ones with notably different challenges, but what is it that makes this circuit so difficult to conquer?
I think that, in my opinion, and this is just a rough estimation, that over half the corners are blind with crests or drops, and they're all fourth, fifth, and sixth gear. So you really need to be confident in where you're placing the wheels, and at those speeds, a tenth of a second is 5 or 10 meters too wide, and the track itself is maybe 15 meters wide in an entirety. That's the one thing that shocked me about Nurburgring when I first saw it, was that I knew it was going to be narrow, but it is far more narrow than I expected. So you need to be inch perfect the entire time, the whole time of the race. Flipping back to Daytona, like you asked, the race is different because, number one, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. So the entire weekend, it's basically daytime, even though you're driving at night. There's one corner that's hard to see, but the other 10 are pretty much straightforward. Just drive around and drive like it's daylight. On top of that, it's mainly a low drag track, so everyone trims out the wing, and I mean, you spend so many seconds just full throttle on the banking, which is essentially a straightaway. Even though it's a turn, it's angled so much that even in the rain, it's full throttle all the way up through the gearbox. You can take one hand off the wheel and kind of look around. It's really quite a piece of cake. almost exactly the polar opposite of what Nurburgring is.
I think that's probably the best answer we could have hoped for. So, the question we've come to every driver with so far, and probably the most intriguing, is what sparked your interest in motorsport and how did you start your career?
Um, I started my career a bit different than most in motorsports. I started quite late. I'm a bit of the anomaly. My interest in motorsport has always been there. As a child, I was always watching motorsport and a fan of the races, and I just couldn't come unglued from the TV watching all sorts of racing, all forms of it. But no one in my family had ever been involved in motorsports, really recreationally or professionally. People enjoyed cars, but no one had been to the track for competitions. So it was kind of flying blind in a sense at the beginning. And I really just I went to the Red Bull hosted a scholarship shootout when I was about 18, 19 years old. And with literally no experience, I entered and did quite well and made it to the semifinals for the US, where they were going to ship 17 of us across the pond to do some driving over in Europe. And at that last cut, after they weeded out thousands of drivers, I made it to the top 50. I didn't make it any further than that because at that point, everyone else I was competing against had national kart championships to their title or already racing stuff. But the fact that I had no experience, all the instructors kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you by far have done nothing compared to everyone else, and you've made it this far. If it's something you're interested in, I suggest you continue." And so I said, "Great, that sounds fantastic. How do I continue? Where do I go? What do I do?" And the next logical step was to go to a racing school, get some instruction on it, some formal instruction. Funny enough, the racing school that I now teach at, the Simraceway PDC, but years ago, that was my first home and getting my credentials, and I raced the school series that they offered there. And it's a great way to develop yourself because you have a same car that everyone else uses, so any difference is between you and the other driver. And I did that for a season, and then ended up winning some races towards the second half of it and figuring it out, and just started one step in front of the other, moving up through the Formula Car ranks, ultimately until Indy Lights. I acquired, or I was given a free test because of a championship I had won in F2000, and I liked the car. But that same week, I had also won a test in a GT car, which was right around the big economic decline in the U.S. And unfortunately, motorsports is expensive and costs sponsorship dollars. So I figured it would be a lot easier to continue a career in sports cars that had manufacturer subsidization for the cost, whereas in open wheel, you have none of that. And so in 2008 and 9, my career took a shift and went from the Formula Car ladder just below IndyCar over to the sports car side, which was a change. In the beginning, a little bit resistant because I love downforce and lightweight machines, like the F3 cars at the Sim Raceway PDC. It's a bit of a nostalgic thing for me. I love watching those cars go around the track or driving them when we need to test something because it speaks to how I started or my roots. But I've fallen to love the GT style of racing, the challenge of the endurance format with multiple drivers and the massive amount of strategy and preparation that it takes as well.
So, a really interesting start to your career, and something that's even more interesting, perhaps, is your record-breaking victories in the Global Time Attack series. Now, so you've gone on to do your GTs, you've come through the Pacific Formula 2000 series, but what makes the Global Time Attack series so different from the series you've raced in now, and does it require a different skill set to the series you race in now?
Yes and no. I think it requires a different mental preparation. Skill set, I think you need to have the skill set that just it's a car is a car. I mean, there's subtle differences with downforce, weight, and things like that, but it's like, again, like Latin, you're speaking a similar base language to drive the machine. Um, the way that global time attack is different is that everything is pinned on about 90 to 180 seconds of a lap. The cars that I was driving for this team were in the unlimited category, which is the highest one, usually goes for overall wins or overall records at the track. And the cars are built with that purpose. And with that in mind, and you're starting from a street car, because that's the rule that most of them, that everyone has to abide by, that you build a car light, you build a car with a small fuel cell, you build it specifically for a purpose to be quick over 2 laps, not to be quick over 10, right? So everything is just built durable enough to last for 2 laps, but more than that, and the car can't really function at its full operating potential. So the mindset for me shifted because it was essentially like qualifying when you're almost out of fuel. I needed to be able to get the ideal lap done within 2 laps, and that was it. That was all I had. Um, So it was a bit different, but it didn't take long to adjust the way I prepared for things and the way that we were able to get the car rolling around the track. And we've had some good success with that Subaru that I was driving there. Some moments where I wish it had been a little bit better, but there's other moments where we've taken the championship and the record down at that particular track numerous times. So I can't really complain. We've had a great run with that thing so far.
So from there, you've gone on to, as we say, the Pacific F2000 series, where you actually took the championship after winning 9 of the 12 races. How pivotal was that in building the next steps in your career?
It was absolutely hugely pivotal. I mean, if that hadn't happened, I'm not sure I would have been where I am today. Mostly because coming from a situation or a family where we didn't really understand motorsport very well, it was all a learning curve for us. That year was proof in the pudding. That was the year where it's like, okay, if I can't get this done now, I don't know that it's worth chasing up the tree further, because the farther up you go, the more sponsor dollars, more expensive everything becomes. So to win that championship really underlined the fact that I can do this and I should do this, and we need to continue with the program and continue with my career and my business and doing things that way. It didn't start out so smooth. I mean, I qualified the car on pole the first race of the year, and I had been to that track the year prior, so I kind of knew it quite well. And I go to fire the car up on the grid, and the car didn't start. And so I had to start a lap down from everybody, and that just made me angry. And then I won the next race, and then it just started snowballing after that. But it was hugely important, that bit of my career.
So would you recommend other aspiring racing drivers to turn their heads towards the series?
Yeah, I would actually. That series or something like that, because in racing sometimes things come and go a little bit, so the field size might grow in one spot and shrink in another. And last I saw, the field wasn't as big as when I was driving. I mean, we had 25 to 30 cars at every race when I drove, or in that ballpark at most of the events. Now it's not quite as large, but a spec-ish, what I would call a spec-ish, not 100%, but where it's mostly just suspension adjustments that you can make. A lower level Pro Formula Series is a fantastic way to develop as a driver, because the cars are so responsive and so sensitive to small little changes from a driver's perspective that it makes the driver hypercritical of his own inputs and his performance, which just allows you to get the last drop out of the towel when you wring it out.
And another option to get your career started as well is to do very much like you did, which is to attend the PDC or a racing school. And it's something you've done to the next level as well. Now, you've obviously become a driver's coach. So how did that come around?
You know, as I was racing in F2000, around that time, halfway through the year, I started working with the racing school as an instructor. It was a great way to fill the gaps between your own race weekends. I mean, if you look at a racing calendar for one championship and you follow that and say, this is my 100% focus this season, you're left with 10 races or 8 races on a weekends, which, leaves you with 40 some odd other weekends of a year where you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, which is easy to become distracted and frankly not very productive. So the coaching side of it for me kept me around cars. It kept my brain engaged in, fundamentally how the chassis are working, even though I'm not driving. It's amazing after doing it a little bit how I can actually see how the car's working and know what we need to do with it, even without talking to the driver. And then in some cases with GT cars, riding in the right seat every now and again, feeling what the car's doing and talking to the driver on the spot, saying, turn the wheel now, release the brake smoother. And it helps really progress them and also keep my brain active and ultimately what I do when I'm behind the wheel as well.
So let's say, for instance, I travel to Sonoma and visit the Simraceway Performance Driving Centre with a coaching session booked with yourself. What would a traditional day of coaching involve with Jeff Westphal?
Traditional day of coaching in Sonoma, we would show up and register with the PDC upstairs. We do a small amount of classroom or theory-based curriculum just to get the day started. The longest one is in the morning to cover operations of how the machine is working, the current one that you're using that day. Make sure everyone's squared away on all the safety bits. And then after that, it's more of a trial and error systematic formula where, one concept will be spoken about, which is one of the more basic concepts for the program or the level that we're teaching. And then we go immediately outside, jump in the race car and try it with live feedback while the student is, while you would be driving the car, I'd be talking to you. Once that drill is done, we go back to the classroom, recap it, talk about the next item that we want to add, and it's a lot like math in a sense, where everything builds on top of each other. So the second item that we would do that day before lunch would be a more advanced version of the first with a couple more bits that you need to get done as a driver. And then we go out and try it again. And we work through the day in that manner where, we want you to understand something and how the car works and what to do, and then immediately go outside and try it right then.
So your involvement with Simraceway has also grown very quickly, and for those of you who may have missed it, Jeff provided a fantastic track guide for Sonoma using one of our WTCC cars in the game. The lap guide is so in-depth that I think alone it would give someone the confidence in taking a real car around the circuit. Was that always the aim?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was always the aim. Part of the reason that I think in coaching I've been able to be so helpful is that not so long ago I was in the other person's shoes. I was trying to figure this out for myself a handful of years back. So I remember the feelings that I had not knowing, or the questions that the driver had, like, well, how do I turn the car here, and what's that bump going to do, and what happens if I lift off the gas, and I write my reviews, or I write my logs for the tracks or guides in a sense, or from a perspective of, you want to do this, but make sure you don't do that, that, and that, because those could create these circumstances that are not ideal, and things that you might not want, like losing the rear end of the car in a very fast corner is one example.
Now, every driver naturally has a different racing style, and the same's going to happen with coaching. Do you have any unique techniques that you use to teach your students?
Yeah, I do actually. I figured that the ultimate thing you need to break down between a driver and a driver's coach is that the driver is going to go to the maximum level of comfort, and the comfort is usually derived by fear, or something that is making the driver afraid of failure or crashing or whatever it may be. And so my technique as a coach, rather than just saying do this with the car, is figuring out a way to deliver the message in a sense that attacks the fear stopping the driver from doing it. Because at the end of the day, you're both there at the track trying to go faster, the driver and the coach. And I try and figure out a way to help the driver break through their own barriers and have an aha moment, not quite 100% on their own, but it'll feel that way, like they're breaking through their boundary and pushing to that next step, and help them do it safely without, forcing them to take too big of a step and have an issue.
How much of a role does the Sim Raceway game play in your coaching style? Do you maybe get the guys on the rig before going out into the car?
Depends on their experience level. It does have a role. I think that if you're brand new to the sport, it's imperative that you have some conceptual idea of what you're going to do when you go out there. Anytime you're on a racetrack, it costs resources, and they're not necessarily cheap. And so you want to be as prepared as you can be. And if you show up for a test day just thinking, well, I'll figure it out as I go, you've already gone 2 steps backwards from where you should be. I think that the simulator is a great way to get, the line or the references for a racetrack that's not very well known for a driver. It's probably one of its strongest attributes, is learning the lay of the land and building the rhythm before you show up and actually do it live with real assets. The other thing that can be good for it is just working on racecraft. You have a system like Simraceway where you have multiple drivers from around the world competing in an event, and you can have a client, or you can jump on the game yourself and have a race with other drivers of varying skill levels. And in some cases, it's drivers like myself and other professionals, where we do it just to stay sharp at certain racetracks. And so the racecraft, or the experience you're going to gain of where to position the car and how to make the pass and to do it all correctly, is valuable stuff that ultimately it takes years to do if you're just doing it on the real circuit.
So what are the main advantages, would you say, of using Simraceway over some of the other products on the market?
The biggest advantage of Simraceway, in my opinion, is the vast majority of styles of cars and different cars they offer. That we help them a little bit on the physics with the cars, and they're quite good. But for me, it's the ability to get from a GT car to a Formula car to a sedan to whatever really I feel like I'm driving, or whatever I need to work on for the upcoming job, or if it's just for recreation. It's such a variety that it offers almost an endless abyss that you can spend hours driving and having fun, but also being productive.
The connection between the game and what you can do at the Performance Driving Centre really is fascinating, but Simraceway is a product that can also be used by someone who's completely new to motorsport. Do you think that if someone who'd never driven before or even played a racing game could follow your lap guide around Sonoma and maybe learn how it feels to drive around the circuit?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest thing with simulators is the integration, visual, using the visual cues only and not having the G-force or the load on the body. Getting used to that is a little bit tricky, and that can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours or 4 hours, depending on the person. So if someone's never had any experience on a simulator, it might take them on the longer end of that scale. But once that happens, they can absolutely really learn how to drive the car and learn how to drive the track 100%.
So it really has been a great insight as to the coaching and what goes on at the PDC. But we've asked all drivers this so far, and I think it'd be rude to exclude you from that list as well. If you could drive any car and any track from Sim Raceway, which combination would you pick and why?
Oh man, that's a tough one. It's a very tough question because there are so many and there's so many good tracks on there. One of my favorite circuits, and it goes in line with why I probably like Nurburgring so much, is natural terrain circuits to me feel the most organic. When you're driving up and down hills that were just there prior to the racetrack's construction, a place like Coda is great because it's new and the facility's awesome, but the character that you get from the racetrack at Watkins Glen is phenomenal. And for me, a GT3 style car like the Audi R8, for example, around Watkins Glen is endless amounts of fun. I can't almost get enough of it. I really enjoy that track and I enjoy driving that car around there a lot.
That's brilliant. So what does the rest of 2015 hold for you? Is it solely focusing on the SCG product, or is there other ambitions in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. There's other ambitions. It's just a matter of what the possibilities are. At the moment, the SCG project is going to take the most of my time. Frankly, but after the 24 hours of Nurburgring, there's been talks about other events, but nothing's confirmed yet. So I think it's unlikely that we'll stop driving the car after Nurburgring. I just can't say, for example, or for precise exactly what I would be doing afterwards. I know I'll be involved with the project. I still do the coaching at the Sim Raceway PDC, and I'm still working with the Scuderia Corsa guys with clients they have in Ferrari Challenge and Pirelli World Challenge, and just developing some of the drivers there that are on the newer end of it, as well as attending all the Tudor races. So it's a tough question to answer, and I'm sorry it's not more direct. I have a lot of things that could potentially happen and probably will. I just can't confirm any one of them at the moment.
And no need to apologise. Obviously, it can be quite difficult to break news with different embargoes and so forth. But it's really hopeful to see in some more action very soon. So, how can people keep up to date with all of your racing adventures after the Nurburgring?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to keep up with it is through social media. For me, that's the easiest way to update the world on what's going on. So I would say on my Instagram or my Twitter, which are at Westphal Racing, would be the tags there for those. Both of those are great ways to keep up with where I am and what's going on, both on that weekend in particular and the future as a 30,000-foot perspective of what's happening as well.
So before we let you go, just wanted to firstly congratulate you on all of your work you've accomplished so far with the Glickenhaus project and Scuderia Corsa, but also on your marriage as well. Now, am I right in saying that you recently got married but had a very unique way of having the rings brought down the aisle?
Yes, you are correct. That was an idea that I had last year while I was racing the Ferrari for Scuderia Corsa, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I think everyone else did too. We got a great reception from it. That little Ferrari driving down the aisle, carrying the rings.
Brilliant. So congratulations on everything so far and best of luck from all of us here at Sim Raceway on not only the Nurburgring 24 but all of your races to follow. Hopefully we can catch up with you very soon and well, yeah, best of luck.
Thank you guys. It's been great. I appreciate you having me on.